Captain David Fletcher read the directive for the third time, his hands trembling in the November cold. Female German prisoners of war are to receive no special treatment, no private quarters, no additional rations, no fraternization beyond what is absolutely necessary for camp operations. They are the enemy, and the enemy does not deserve comfort. The last three words were underlined in red ink. Fletcher opened his bottom drawer and pulled out a yellowed letter. He knew it by heart, but he read it anyway. Dear David, I need to tell you about something that happened last week. We got separated during the bombing near Dover. Me, Dr. Patterson, and Sergeant Mills. We ended up in German territory. A family found us in their barn. They could have turned us in. Instead, they hid us in their cellar for 3 days. The daughter, Anna, brought us bread so hard we had to soak it to eat, but it was food. The old man gave Dr. Patterson his coat. They had nothing, David, nothing. And they shared it anyway. Before we left, I asked Anna why. She looked at me like I'd asked the stupidest question in the world. Because you are cold, she said. Because you are hungry. What else would we do? Maybe the bravest thing we can do is remember that our enemies are human too, especially when it would be easier to forget. Love, Rachel, Rachel. 23 years old when she wrote that letter from London in 1943. Dead 2 weeks later when the V2 hit her field hospital. Fletcher placed the letter beside Washington's directive. 2 documents, 2 philosophies. One demanded cruelty justified by victory. The other suggested something harder, compassion, despite defeat. He folded the directive, locked it in his drawer, and made his choice. Elizabeth Mayer Liesel, to anyone who'd known her before, pressed her face against the bus window and tried to comprehend what she was seeing. Iowa looked like a world that had never known war. Fields stretched to the horizon, red barns standing whole against gray sky. A child threw snowballs at a dog in a front yard. No bomb craters, no ruins, no hollow-eyed refugees picking through rubble. Liesel pulled out her hidden notebook, her pencil moving in angry strokes. They told us we were fighting for survival. They told us the Americans were suffering too. But their cities stand, their children play, and ours are ash. Dresden burns behind my eyes every time I close them. I searched for 3 days after the bombing. I didn't find mutter, just bodies and smoke and silence. America looks like it never heard of the war at all. She closed the notebook as Claudia stirred beside her, just 19, 8 months pregnant, eyes already old. Where are we? Claudia's voice was thin. Iowa, wherever that is. Liesel stared out the window. It looks like a painting. The bus slowed, approaching Camp Clarinda. Guard towers, barbed wire, wooden barracks in precise rows. But something was different. The buildings looked maintained, clean. Someone had raked the paths. It meant nothing. And yet, the door opened, letting in brutal November wind. Liesel's thin jacket offered no protection. Around her, women gathered their pathetic bundles and prepared to face whatever came next. Claudia struggled to stand. At the bottom of the bus steps stood a young American soldier, maybe 21, freckles, wheat-colored hair. When Claudia stumbled on the top step, he moved instinctively. His hand caught her arm, steadying her. Claudia flinched violently, her whole body tensing for the blow. In Germany, in the French holding camps, kindness had always been a trap, but the soldier just held her arm until she found footing, then let go. Careful, ma'am, he said, his accent strange and broad. It's slippery. Claudia stared at him, uncomprehending. An American soldier had just called her ma'am. From the administration building, Captain Fletcher watched the scene unfold. He saw the fear in Claudia's eyes, Private Bennett's instinctive kindness, the boy's own surprise at his actions. He saw himself reflected in all of it, the order in his locked drawer, the choice he'd already made. As the last woman descended, sharp eyes taking in every detail of Camp Clarinda, Fletcher and Liesel's gazes met across the compound. She saw something in his nod, a question maybe, or a promise. She couldn't have said what, just a feeling that maybe possibly this place might be different. She was right. She just didn't know yet how different or what it would cost her to find out. Nurse Catherine Walsh had worked field hospitals in Normandy, had performed surgery, while shells rattled the instruments in her hands. She thought nothing could surprise her anymore. Then 127 German women walked into her processing area. They were in bad shape, malnourished, several with infections. One girl burning with fever, and Claudia, the pregnant one, was in early labor. The protocol was clear document, everyone first, medical screening second. Medicine could wait an hour. Walsh took one look at Claudia's pale, sweating face and made her decision. You, and you. Medical tent. Now. A corporal objected. Ma'am, the protocol. Can wait, Walsh said, her voice carrying 3 years of watching boys die from bureaucratic delays. These women can't. She looked past him to Captain Fletcher in the doorway. He nodded once. The women were taken to the medical tent. In the corner, Liesel watched this exchange with narrow eyes, filing it away. Protocol broken. Captain approves. Why the delousing station was where things usually went to hell. Strip cold water, harsh soap, DDT powder everywhere. Designed to be dehumanizing to remind prisoners they were defeated. Sergeant Frank O'Brien had other ideas. He'd lost his brother Patrick at the Bulge. Patrick, who'd wanted to be a priest, who'd written about German prisoners who were just scared kids, really barely 18. They're supposed to be monsters, Patrick's last letter had said, but mostly they just looked tired. Frank thought about Patrick every day. Listen up, he told his squad. You treat these women with basic human dignity, or you answer to me personally. Clear. When the women filed in, they found hot water, real soap, privacy curtains, respectful distance. Liesel waited in line, preparing for humiliation. She'd been through this in France, cold water, rough hands, eyes, everywhere. But Sergeant O'Brien simply pointed to a stall. Showers hot, soap's on the shelf. Take your time. She waited for the catch. It didn't come. Behind the curtain, she turned on the water. It was hot, actually hot. Something inside Liesel broke. She'd held herself together through Germany's collapse, through the Atlantic crossing, through processing, and the slow death of hope. But hot water, clean soap, simple dignity, it was too much. She cried, hands braced against the wall, water mixing with tears. Outside, Private Bennett stood guard. He heard the crying and looked away, giving what privacy he could. The mess hall delivered the final shock. Sergeant Robert Hayes, a black man from Alabama, who'd spent his career cooking for men who treated him as invisible, had prepared what he considered a proper meal. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, standard military fare. For the women, it was a feast. Liesel stood in line watching generous portions being served, real meat, creamy potatoes, warm bread. At the table, she just stared at her plate. Around her, women had similar reactions. Some couldn't eat stomachs too shrunken. Others ate slowly, carefully, afraid it would be snatched away. Monica, who hadn't seen food like this since 1943, started crying into her mashed potatoes. Bennett was serving seconds. He saw Monica crying and didn't know what to say, so he did the only thing he could think of. He placed an extra roll on her tray. Their eyes met. In that moment, they weren't soldier and prisoner, victor and defeated. Just two people, one hungry, one with bread. Danke, she whispered. You're welcome, ma'am, Bennett said. From the doorway, Fletcher watched it all. This is what Rachel meant. What else would we do? The barracks had been cleaned, wood stoves fueled, multiple blankets per bunk, mattresses with pillows, and strangest of all, curtains on the windows. Liesel claimed a lower bunk near a stove. Above her, Christina Hoffman settled in, 28 former party member defiant. Don't get comfortable, Christina said. This is a trick. A trick. They want something, information maybe, or they want us to let our guard down. My father said Americans smile while they stab you in the back. Liesel thought about the hot water, the food, Bennett's kindness. What if they're just being decent? Christina laughed bitterly. Decent, we're the defeated enemy. No one is decent to defeated enemies. Liesel had no answer. In Germany, prisoners had been treated as less than human, the concentration camps, the whispered rumors, the Russian POWs dying by thousands. Cruelty had been policy, so why were the Americans different? At 2:17 a.m., Claudia gave birth. Dr. Thornton, the civilian physician Fletcher, called and delivered a baby girl while Walsh assisted. The labor was difficult. Claudia, malnourished baby, 3 weeks early, but both survived. Word spread within hours. Women whispered in the dark. The American doctor came. Real medicine. The baby is healthy. They provided formula and diapers. Each fact passed along with wonder, disbelief, cautious thawing of expectations. Fletcher stood outside the infirmary at 3 a.m., listening to a newborn's cry through the window. Walsh stepped out pulling off surgical gloves. Both doing well, better than expected. The civilian doctor's going to show up on the books, she said carefully. Washington will have questions. Let them question. David. She used his first name. I support what you're doing, but they could come after you. Fletcher thought about Rachel's letter about choosing conscience over command. Then they come after me, he said. But that baby deserved to be born safe. Walsh nodded, then hesitated. There's something you should know. When I was processing files earlier, one of the women, Elizabeth Mayer, her paperwork looks altered. Name appears later than other information, like it was added afterward. Fletcher frowned. You think she's using a false identity? I think she has secrets. Walsh looked back at the infirmary. And I think those secrets might matter. Inside the barracks, Liesl lay in her bunk, listening to whispers about the birth. A baby welcomed with medicine and care, not cruelty. She thought about her mother somewhere in Munich's ruins, if she was even alive. The last letter 6 months ago, the city is gone, Liesl. Everything is gone. I don't know how much longer we can hold on. And here Liesl was warm, fed, safe, while her mother starved in rubble. The guilt was crushing. She opened her notebook and wrote one line, how can I eat when she is hungry? How can I survive when she might not? The question would haunt her for months, but for now, exhausted, she finally slept and dreamed of her mother and fire and a wooden bird with wings spread wide forever on the verge of flight. By week 2, a rhythm had established itself at Camp Clarinda. Wake at 6, roll call at 6:30, breakfast at 7, work assignments at 8. The structure was military, rigid, predictable. But within that structure, something unexpected was happening. Liesl found herself assigned to the communications office with Corporal Rodriguez, a radio specialist from Texas. She'd expected to be treated as labor fetch, this carry that speak when spoken to. Instead, Rodriguez handed her a technical manual. You operated radios in Germany, write Wehrmacht frequency protocols. She nodded carefully, unsure where this was going. These are ours, American, similar principles, different execution. You think you can learn the differences? It wasn't an interrogation, it was collaboration. Over the following weeks, they worked side by side discussing signal propagation, interference patterns, equipment maintenance. Rodriguez treated her like a colleague, not a prisoner. He asked about her family. She told him about her mother in Munich, the uncertainty of not knowing. My grandmother's in Mexico, Rodriguez said one afternoon, adjusting a frequency dial. Haven't heard from her in 2 years. Mail's all screwed up down there, so I get it. The not knowing, it's worse than bad news sometimes. Liesl looked at him, this American soldier who'd bombed her country into rubble, and saw something she hadn't expected to find understanding. In the camp garden, Private Bennett taught Liesl English while they worked. Potato, shovel, cold, home. She repeated each word carefully, her accent thick but improving. When she struggled with pronunciation, he'd slow down, demonstrating courage. No impatience, no mockery. One afternoon, dirt under her fingernails, Liesl asked him a question she'd been forming for days. How do you say I am sorry in English? Bennett looked up from the seedlings he was planting. For what? For the war. For everything. He had no answer. What could he say? That it was okay, it wasn't. That she was forgiven, that wasn't his to give. So he just nodded, acknowledged the weight she was carrying, and went back to planting. But something had shifted between them. They weren't just guard and prisoner anymore. Sergeant O'Brien played chess with Sophia, a former army clerk who beat him 3 games out of 4. He pretended to be annoyed, but the truth was he looked forward to their matches. They never discussed the war, never addressed what divided them, just moved pieces across a board and found strange peace in ritualized conflict. The canteen became a weekly revelation. The first time the women were allowed to purchase items with camp script, they stood in line like children with pocket money. Chocolate real Hershey bars that melted on the tongue. Monica bought one, broke it into squares, shared it with her barracks mates. They ate slowly, savoring, making it last. It was such a small thing, a few cents of chocolate, but it represented choice, abundance, normalcy they'd thought lost forever. Captain Fletcher made his second major modification to Washington's directive: 2 letters per month instead of 1, lighter censorship, cooperation with the Red Cross to trace missing family members, more work for his staff, more complications. He didn't care. When the women learned they could write home, the reaction was immediate. In the barracks that evening, dozens sat with paper and pencils struggling to find words. Liesel wrote to her mother in Munich, "Mother, I am alive and well. I am in America in a place called Iowa. It is very cold here, but I am warm. They feed us good food every day, real meat, real bread. I know you won't believe me, but it's true. Please write back if you can. I need to know you're alive." She stared at the words, wondering if they'd be censored. They seemed impossible, too positive, too grateful. Would her mother think she'd been brainwashed? She sealed the letter anyway, hoping. 3 weeks later, she received a reply. The letter was brief, written on torn notebook paper in shaky handwriting, but her mother was alive, living in the ruins of their apartment with 2 other families, cold, hungry, struggling, but alive. Liesel read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it under her pillow. Proof of life. That was everything. Not everyone was so fortunate. Some letters returned marked address unknown or undeliverable. Some women never received replies at all, leaving them to wonder and fear the worst. Monica received a letter from her sister saying their parents were dead, killed in the Dresden bombing, the same bombing Liesel had survived. That night, Liesel held Monica while she cried and thought about the randomness of survival. Why had she lived when Monica's parents hadn't? Why was her mother alive when so many others were dead? There were no answers, just guilt and grief and the slow, painful work of continuing anyway. In early February, Captain Fletcher implemented an education program. Professor Emily Walsh from the local college came twice a week to teach American history and democratic principles. Some women refused to participate, viewing it as indoctrination, but many attended hungry for information and intellectual stimulation. Liesel became one of the most active participants, attending every class, watching every film, engaging in every debate. Learning about the American Revolution was radical for women raised under authoritarian rule, a nation born from rebellion against authority, the idea that governments derive legitimacy from the consent of the governed, not from the power of leaders. Professor Walsh didn't preach. She presented facts, asked questions, let them think. One afternoon, during a debate about individual rights versus collective duty, Liesel spoke up. "In Germany, we were taught that individuals must sacrifice for the state, that personal desires are selfish, that we exist to serve something larger than ourselves." She paused, choosing words carefully. "Here you believe the state exists to serve individuals. It's backwards from what I was taught." "And which system worked better?" Professor Walsh asked. Liesel looked around the warm classroom at well-fed women at the peaceful camp. Then she thought of Germany, the ruins, the starvation, the total defeat. The answer was obvious, but saying it aloud felt like betrayal. "Yours did," she admitted quietly. "Yours worked better." The room went silent. "Why do you think that is?" Walsh pressed gently. Liesel struggled to articulate thoughts that were still forming. Because when the state is everything, individual human beings become nothing, disposable. But when individuals matter, when their lives and dignity are protected, that creates something stronger than any ideology. It was the first time she'd said it out loud. The first time she'd admitted that everything she'd been taught might have been wrong. Christina, sitting in the back of the room, stood abruptly and left. She didn't return to the education sessions. The confrontation came in late February. American newspapers had been made available to the women, another of Fletcher's quiet modifications. They read about the liberation of concentration camps. At first, many dismissed it as propaganda. "It's lies," Christina insisted, "American exaggeration to justify the war." But the evidence kept mounting. Photographs, witness testimonies, official army reports. The documentation was overwhelming. One evening, Nurse Walsh asked if she could speak to a group of women in the common room. About 20 gathered, curious and wary. Walsh had been at the liberation of Dachau. She told them what she'd seen, not with drama or embellishment, just clinical recitation of facts. The piles of bodies, the living skeletons, the gas chambers, the systematic industrialization of death. She showed them photographs, official U.S. Army photographs, not propaganda posters. The room was silent when she finished. Some women wept, others sat in stunned horror. Christina stood up. "It's propaganda. You're lying to break us down, to make us hate ourselves." "I'm not lying," Walsh said quietly. "I was there. I saw it with my own eyes." "Then you're mistaken, or exaggerating. The Reich wouldn't, we wouldn't." "We did," Liesel said, her voice cutting through the room. "We did do it. Look at the photographs, Christina. Look at the testimony. Look at the evidence." "You're a traitor," Christina spat. "They've brainwashed you." "No." Liesel stood, her whole body shaking. "They've just told us the truth we didn't want to see, the truth we chose to ignore. We were following orders. There is always a choice." Liesel's voice rose. "We chose not to ask questions. We chose not to see. We chose to believe the lies because believing was easier than facing what we were part of. That makes us complicit." Christina stared at her with something like hatred. "I don't know you anymore." "Good," Liesel said, "because I don't want to be who I was." Christina stormed out, requesting a transfer to different barracks the next day. After everyone left, Nurse Walsh approached Liesel. "Can we talk privately?" They walked to Walsh's office. The nurse closed the door and pulled out a file. "When I processed your paperwork, I noticed something. Your file was altered. I had a friend check with captured German records." Walsh's eyes were kind but firm. "Your real name is Elisabeth von Reichmann. Your father was Oberst Heinrich von Reichmann, head of logistics for the Eastern Front deportations." The room tilted. Liesel gripped the edge of the desk. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know what the trains were for. Not until the end, when everything fell apart and people started talking." "I believe you. I changed my name when Germany collapsed. I thought if I could disappear, maybe I could escape what my family did." Her voice broke. "My father shot himself when the Soviets came. My mother said it was honor, but there's no honor in what we did." Walsh was quiet for a moment. "I can't absolve you. That's not my place, but I believe you didn't know. And what you do now, how you choose to live with this knowledge, that's what defines you." Liesel looked up, tears streaming down her face. "How do I live with this? My father helped murder millions. I typed reports. I filed orders. I was part of the machine." "You can't change the past," Walsh said gently, "but you can choose what kind of person you become. That choice matters." The camp split after that night. Those who faced the truth versus those who denied it. Liesel's group versus Christina's group. Friendships torn apart. The barracks divided. Some women stopped speaking to each other entirely. Christina confronted Liesel one final time in the mess hall. "You're all being brainwashed. They feed you, they're nice to you, and you forget loyalty. You forget who you are." "Loyalty to what?" Liesel shot back. "To a regime that committed genocide, that destroyed our country. That's not loyalty, Christina. That's blindness." "And what about loyalty to our people, to Germany?" Real loyalty means facing the truth about what Germany did. It means not repeating the same mistakes. It means building something better. Christina's laugh was bitter. You sound like them now, like an American. Maybe that's not a bad thing. They never spoke again. That night, Liesel wrote in her journal, I thought the hardest thing would be losing the war. I was wrong. The hardest thing is learning what we fought for was evil. The hardest thing is understanding that I served it willingly, even if I didn't know the full truth. The hardest thing is living with the knowledge that my father's hands were covered in blood and my hands helped him. Nurse Walsh says, I can choose who I become. But how do you become someone new when the weight of who you were crushes you every day? She had no answer, not yet, but slowly, painfully, she was learning to ask the right questions. And that Fletcher thought when he read Walsh's report about the confrontation was the beginning of transformation. Colonel William Brennan arrived unannounced on a gray March morning, stepping out of a staff car with a clipboard and an expression that promised trouble. Captain Fletcher watched from his office window as the Inspector General surveyed Camp Clarinda with cold, efficient eyes. This was it, the reckoning he'd been expecting since November. Sir, Sergeant O'Brien appeared in the doorway. The IG wants to see you. Now. Fletcher straightened his uniform, grabbed the folder containing every decision he'd made that violated Washington's directive, and walked to meet his fate. Brennan didn't waste time with pleasantries. Captain Fletcher, I'm here because someone filed a report claiming this facility provides preferential treatment to enemy prisoners, violations of the November directive, fraternization, unauthorized expenditures. He opened his clipboard. Care to respond? The report is accurate, sir, Fletcher said. I have violated the directive multiple times, deliberately. Brennan's eyebrows rose slightly. You're admitting it? Yes, sir. I interpreted the Geneva Convention's requirements for prisoner treatment as superseding the directive. Where the two conflicted, I chose the convention. The directive came from Washington, from your commanding officers. Yes, sir, and I believe it was wrong. The silence that followed was dangerous. O'Brien, standing by the door, looked like he wanted to intervene, but knew better. Show me your camp, Captain, Brennan said finally. Everything. I want to see what you've done with my own eyes. For 2 days, Brennan inspected every corner of Camp Clarinda. He reviewed meal records portions too generous. He examined the barracks heated beyond regulation. He sat in on an education class, unauthorized civilian contractor. He watched guards playing chess with prisoners, clear fraternization. He interviewed guards. How would you describe the treatment of prisoners here? Fair, sir, Bennett said. We treat them like human beings. And you don't see a problem with that. They're enemy combatants. They're women, sir. Most of them clerks and radio operators. They didn't shoot at us. They got caught up in the same war we did. He interviewed prisoners. Through an interpreter, he asked Liesel, how has your treatment been? She chose her words carefully. Better than I expected. Better than I deserve, perhaps. Explain. I served a regime that committed atrocities. I wore the uniform of an army that destroyed Europe. I expected punishment. Instead, I received mercy. She paused. That mercy has changed me more than punishment ever could. Brennan wrote something in his notes that Liesel couldn't see. On the second evening, he called Fletcher to his temporary office. O'Brien tried to follow, but Brennan dismissed him. This conversation would be private. Captain Fletcher, you've read the directive regarding female POWs, correct? Yes, sir. And you chose to ignore it. I chose to interpret it in light of the Geneva Convention and basic human decency, sir. Brennan leaned back in his chair, studying Fletcher with an unreadable expression. I came here expecting to find a soft commander who'd let sympathy cloud his judgment, a man who'd undermined military discipline for feel-good nonsense. Fletcher said nothing, waiting. What I found instead, Brennan continued, is a well-run facility with high morale, effective operations, and prisoners who are being successfully prepared for repatriation and reintegration into a democratic Germany. Fletcher blinked, certain he'd misheard. The directive was written by men who never set foot in a POW camp, Brennan said, written when emotions were high and vengeance seemed appropriate. But you were on the ground dealing with real human beings. History will judge your choices more favorably than that directive captain. Sir, Brennan held up a hand. I'm not commending you. You did violate orders, but I'm also not court-martialing you. My report will state that Camp Clarinda is in compliance with the Geneva Convention and that any deviations from the November directive were made in service of that compliance. Relief flooded through Fletcher. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Brennan's expression hardened. There's a problem. Someone in your camp filed that report. Someone wanted you investigated. Until I find out who and why, I can't close this case. Because whoever did it might file again, and next time you might not get an inspector who understands nuance. Do you have any leads, sir? I'm interviewing your entire staff tomorrow. One of them betrayed you, Captain, and I intend to find out who. The confession came the next afternoon. Private Mitchell Thompson requested to speak with Colonel Brennan privately. Fletcher had barely noticed Thompson, a quiet guard who kept to himself, did his job competently but without distinction, never complained, never stood out. In Brennan's temporary office, Thompson stood at attention, his face pale but determined. Sir, I filed the report. I'm the one who informed Washington about the violations. Brennan gestured to a chair. Sit down, Private, and tell me why. Thompson sat, hands clenched in his lap. My wife and daughter were at Pearl Harbor, sir. Civilians. Emily worked as a nurse at the Naval Hospital. Our daughter Sarah was 3 years old. Emily brought her to work that day because the babysitter was sick. His voice remained steady, but his knuckles were white. They were both killed in the attack. December 7th, 1941. Sarah's body was never recovered. Emily's was. The funeral was closed casket. I'm sorry for your loss, Private Oasero, Brennan said quietly. I requested combat duty 17 times, sir. Every time rejected. Poor eyesight. So I got stuck stateside training other men to go fight while I stayed behind. Then they assigned me here, to Camp Clarinda, to guard German prisoners. He looked up, meeting Brennan's eyes. I watched Captain Fletcher give them hot showers, good food, clean beds, education classes. He called in a civilian doctor for one of them, spent camp funds to make sure her baby was born safe. And all I could think was, my daughter died screaming in fire. My wife died trying to save other people's children. And we're giving the enemy chocolate. Thompson's voice finally broke. I know they're not Japanese. I know they didn't attack Pearl Harbor. But they're still the enemy, sir. They're still the people we're fighting. And seeing them treated so well while my family is dead, I couldn't stomach it. The office was silent except for the clock ticking on the wall. So you filed the report, Brennan said. Yes, sir. I thought if Washington knew what was happening, they'd stop it. They'd make Captain Fletcher follow the directive. They'd make the prisoners suffer at least a little bit for what this war took from all of us. He straightened. I'm ready to accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate, sir. Brennan looked at this broken man who'd lost everything and responded with the only weapon he had: bureaucratic betrayal. Private Thompson, your pain is real and your loss is valid. No one here is going to tell you otherwise. But, sir, Brennan continued, this camp's mission is not vengeance. It's preparing these women to rebuild a democratic Germany, to become allies instead of enemies. Your pain doesn't justify undermining that mission. Thompson nodded, defeated. You'll be reassigned. Not as punishment, you haven't violated any regulations by filing that report. But for your own well-being, you need to be somewhere else, Private, somewhere that doesn't tear you apart every day. Yes, sir. After Thompson left, Brennan called Fletcher in. You heard? Fletcher nodded. He'd been listening outside the door. What do you want to do? Fletcher thought about Thompson's pain, about Rachel's death, about all the ways war created wounds that never fully healed. I want to talk to him before he leaves. Fletcher found Thompson in the barracks packing his gear. Private! Thompson came to attention. Sir? At ease. Fletcher closed the door. I heard about your wife and daughter. I'm sorry. No one should have to carry that. Thank you, sir. I also lost someone. My sister Rachel, V2 rocket in London, 1943. She was a nurse like your wife. Fletcher pulled out the worn letter. She wrote this before she died. I've read it so many times I've memorized it. Want to know what it says? Thompson nodded, uncertain. It says that a German family saved her life, hid her from patrols, shared their food, risked their own safety for an enemy. And it says that maybe the bravest thing we can do is remember that our enemies are human too. He folded the letter carefully. I think about that every day, Thompson. I think about how easy it would be to hate, how justified that hatred would be, how good it might feel to make them suffer. Then why don't you, sir? Because Rachel was right. Cruelty might feel satisfying in the moment, but mercy has the power to transform. Those women in this camp, some of them are different people now than when they arrived. They've confronted what Germany did. They've learned what democracy looks like. They're going to go back and help rebuild something better. Fletcher met Thompson's eyes. Your wife and daughter deserve justice, but justice isn't the same as revenge. Justice is making sure their deaths meant something, making sure we build a world where that kind of horror doesn't happen again, and that starts with choosing mercy when we could choose cruelty. Thompson was quiet for a long moment. Then, does it get easier, sir, the grief? No, Fletcher said honestly, but you learn to carry it, and you learn to do good things in spite of it. By summer 1946, plans were underway to begin repatriating the prisoners. The women had mixed emotions. They wanted to go home, wanted to see their families, but they also dreaded it. Germany was a ruin, and they themselves had changed in ways that would make returning difficult. In the barracks one evening, Liesel voiced what many felt. I'm afraid to go back. Not afraid of the conditions. I know it will be hard. I'm afraid that I won't fit anymore. I've learned too much here, changed too much. How do I go back to being a good German woman when I no longer know what that means? Sophia nodded. We've seen what democracy looks like. We've experienced individual dignity. We've learned to question authority. Those are dangerous lessons to bring back. In the final weeks, the women sought out the Americans who'd shown them kindness. Liesel found Bennett working in the garden one last time. She'd carved something in her free time, a small wooden bird, wings spread as if in flight. She'd meant to give it to him as thanks. I wanted to thank you, she said in careful English. You were kind when you didn't have to be. You taught me English. You treated me like a person, not an enemy. I will remember that always. Bennett took the carving, turning it over in his hands. I didn't do anything special. You reminded me of my sister. I couldn't be cruel to you. That's exactly the point, Liesel said. You saw a person, not an enemy. That's everything. She started to hand him the bird, but Bennett gently pushed it back. You keep it, he said. Remember that you can fly, that you can be someone new. Liesel's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Thomas. It was the first time she'd used his first name. Similar scenes played out across the camp. Women thanked guards who'd shared cigarettes, taught them card games, showed them small kindnesses. They thanked Nurse Walsh, whose medical care and tough honesty had saved more than lives. They thanked Sergeant Hayes, whose food had sustained them. They thanked Captain Fletcher, though few understood the risk he'd taken. Fletcher accepted their thanks with quiet dignity. You would have done the same, he said, though he wasn't sure that was true. The ship that carried them back to Europe was crowded, but nothing like the voyage that had brought them to America. They were healthier now, stronger, better prepared, but they were also burdened by knowledge and transformation. Liesel arrived in Bremen in September 1946 to a Germany barely recognizable. Entire city blocks were rubble. People lived in cellars. Food was rationed at starvation levels. She made her way to Munich, traveling on crowded trains through a shattered landscape. When she finally found her mother's cellar apartment, the reunion was bittersweet. Her mother was alive but aged beyond her years, thin and tired and worn. They embraced and wept, but there was awkwardness too. You look so healthy, her mother said, and there was something in her tone that wasn't quite accusation, but wasn't quite neutral either. The Americans fed you well. Yes, Mother, they did. They treated us well, better than they had to. Her mother said nothing, but Liesel could see complicated emotions crossing her face. Relief, resentment, confusion. Liesel stayed in Germany, rebuilding slowly and painfully. She worked as a translator for the American occupation authorities using the English Bennett had taught her. She married a school teacher who believed in democracy. She had children and told them stories about the war, about captivity, about American soldiers who chose mercy when they could have chosen revenge. She never forgot Private Bennett, Captain Fletcher, Nurse Walsh. She kept the wooden bird carving on her desk for the rest of her life, wings spread forever on the verge of flight. Epilogue, Berlin, November 1989. Liesel was an old woman now, watching the Berlin Wall fall on television. Young people dancing on concrete that had divided a nation for decades, hammers and chisels breaking down what had seemed permanent. Her daughter sat beside her. "You're crying, Mama." "It took us 40 years, Liesel said softly. 40 years to learn what the Americans tried to teach us in 1946, that people matter more than ideology, that mercy is stronger than cruelty, that the true measure of a society is how it treats those who have no power." "Do you think they knew?" her daughter asked. "The Americans who ran the camp. Do you think they knew they were changing you?" Liesel considered this. "I think they didn't think about it that way. They just saw women who needed help, and they helped. But yes, they changed us. They changed me." She touched the wooden bird on the desk. "And I've spent my whole life trying to live up to the mercy they showed." On her desk, next to the bird, sat a yellowed newspaper clipping, Captain David Fletcher's obituary from 1972. Liesel had flown from Germany to Iowa for his funeral, to say goodbye to the man who'd shown her that even in war, humanity could survive. Her granddaughter, visiting from Berlin, picked up the bird carving. "Oma, why is this so important to you?" Liesel smiled, touching the bird gently. "Because it reminds me that we always have a choice, even when we think we don't, and sometimes choosing kindness over cruelty, mercy over vengeance, that's the most courageous act of all." She looked back at the television, at the wall, coming down at the young people celebrating freedom. "Your generation is tearing down walls," she said. "My generation built them or stood by while they were built. But in between, there was a moment, a few months in an Iowa prison camp, when I learned that walls don't have to be permanent, that people can change, that mercy has the power to transform." The wooden bird sat on her desk, wings spread wide, still ready to fly, still teaching the lesson it had taught for 40 years, that the bravest thing we can do is choose to be human, even when everything else tells us to be monsters.